My name is Fiona Graves, and I'm 43 years old, and I never thought the people I raised would mock the way I walk. When I was 28, I met Patrick Graves, a widower with 2 young children and a heart so large it filled every room he entered. We met at a small community art show where I was displaying my first series of watercolor paintings. He bought one, said it reminded him of his late wife's smile, and before I knew it, we were having coffee, talking about second chances. I loved that about Patrick. He believed people could start over, no matter how broken they felt. Our life together was simple, but beautiful. Melissa and Jared, his kids from his first marriage, were 10 and 13 when I entered their lives. It wasn't easy at first. They were polite, but distant. I tried to be patient, showing up to every school event, every scraped knee, every heartbreak. In time, I thought I'd earned their love. When Patrick died 5 years ago in a car crash, everything changed. I was in that car too. He was driving us back from an anniversary dinner when the other driver ran a red light. I woke up in the hospital to the sound of a heart monitor that wasn't his. I'd survived barely, but I would never walk the same again. The doctors said I was lucky. I didn't feel lucky. I felt incomplete. The cane became part of me, a quiet, metallic whisper of what I'd lost. Every time it clicked against the floor, it reminded me of Patrick's absence. But I never hid from it. I used it with pride because it meant I was still standing. Melissa and Jared didn't see it that way. At first, they were sympathetic. They helped me with groceries, drove me to appointments, even brought flowers on my birthday. But as the months turned into years, something in them hardened. Maybe it was grief they never processed. Maybe it was resentment. I'm not sure. What I do know is that their kindness faded, replaced by indifference and, eventually, cruelty. They started making little jokes about my limp. Harmless things at first, Jared calling me Professor Limp when I dropped something in the kitchen. Melissa pretending to imitate the sound of my cane when I walked. I laughed it off. I told myself it wasn't worth reacting to. But lately, their words had gotten sharper, more deliberate. During dinner one night, I heard Melissa whisper to Jared, "I swear, when she walks behind me in public, it's like a metronome from hell." He laughed. I didn't say a word. I just stared at my plate until they left the table. That night, I sat alone in the quiet of my living room, staring at Patrick's portrait above the fireplace. His smile, frozen in paint, felt almost mocking. I whispered, "You'd know what to say, wouldn't you?" But he didn't answer. He never could again. I thought about the years I'd spent holding this family together. About the nights I stayed up late helping Jared study for exams. The afternoons I taught Melissa to drive. I had given them everything I had left. Love, stability, security. And now, they treated me like an inconvenience. Sometimes, grief twists people into versions of themselves they don't recognize. But sometimes, it just reveals who they truly are. That evening, I decided to stop expecting them to change. You can't make people value what they never had to earn. The next morning, I got up early, made myself a cup of tea, and opened the curtains to let the light in. The sun hit my cane, and for a moment, it glinted like a sword. A strange little reminder that maybe strength doesn't always look graceful. Sometimes, it limps. Sometimes, it creaks. But it moves forward all the same. I looked around the house, the same one Patrick and I had built together, and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. The walls echoed with laughter, but not his. Not anymore. Just the sharp, mocking kind that left bruises invisible to the eye. Melissa and Jared had stopped seeing me as family. I was just the obstacle between them and their inheritance, the gatekeeper to their father's money. I'd always ignored their greed, convincing myself they'd mature eventually. But deep down, I knew Patrick would have been disappointed to see what they'd become. Still, I kept trying. I cooked their favorite meals when they visited. I asked about their lives. I sent them birthday gifts even when they didn't bother calling on mine. I tried to love them harder, as if affection could scrub away their selfishness. But people don't learn kindness by being given everything. They learn it by losing something that matters. And I realized maybe that was the only way they'd ever understand me. Not through lectures. Not through guilt. But through loss. The kind of loss that stings. That reshapes you. That humbles you. That night I wrote in my journal something I hadn't done in years. I wrote, "You can't force respect. You can only demand it by walking away." I underlined walking twice, and smirked bitterly at the irony. Then I closed the book, placed my cane beside my bed, and stared at the ceiling in the dark. That night, I decided something in this family was about to change forever. The day they decided to turn my pain into entertainment was the day they crossed a line they couldn't uncross. It started on an ordinary Saturday morning, the kind of day that seemed too peaceful to go wrong. Melissa had called earlier that week, saying she wanted to make it up to me with a family brunch. I was surprised, but hopeful. Maybe she and Jared were finally trying to reconnect. Maybe the guilt from their cruel jokes had caught up to them. I said yes, of course. Hope has a funny way of lingering, even when it shouldn't. By 11, the house smelled like coffee and bacon. Melissa arrived first, all smiles and perfume. She wore a pink sundress and carried store-bought muffins in a paper bag, acting like she'd baked them herself. Jared came next, dragging along Tyler, Melissa's boyfriend, a smug real estate agent who loved to make himself at home in other people's houses. They greeted me with forced cheer, calling me Miss Fiona in sing-song voices. I tried not to flinch. I reminded myself, it's just brunch, keep the peace. Why don't you sit down and relax? Melissa said. We'll handle everything. Her tone was honeyed but insincere. Still, I smiled and took a seat at the dining table. My cane leaned against the counter near the stove as I watched them bustle around, pretending to be helpful. For a few minutes, it almost felt normal. The sound of eggs sizzling, Tyler humming off-key, Jared teasing Melissa about her cooking. I even allowed myself a small smile. Maybe I'd misjudged them. Maybe they were trying. Then, I got up to check the oven timer. It was only a few steps, but when I reached for my cane, it wasn't there. I frowned, glancing around. I always kept it close. Always. Has anyone seen my cane? I asked lightly. It was right here. They all froze for half a second, just enough time for guilt to flicker across Melissa's face before she shrugged. No idea, Fiona. Maybe you misplaced it? My chest tightened. I looked under the table, behind the counter. Nothing. The laughter started then, quiet at first. Like they were trying to suppress it. On the screen, a video was playing me, moments ago, walking slowly to the oven, reaching out for my cane. My movements were unsteady, vulnerable. The camera zoomed in as I realized it was gone, my hand trembling in midair. In the background, I could hear them snickering. I stared at the phone in disbelief. You recorded me? Melissa giggled. It was just a joke, Fiona. Don't be so serious. Yeah, Jared added. We thought it'd go viral. No, like those funny grandma TikToks. Grandma, that word hit harder than they knew. Where is it? I asked quietly. Melissa shrugged again, but Tyler pointed out the window toward the backyard. Somewhere out there, I think. I hobbled to the door, refusing to let them see how badly my legs shook. Each step felt heavier, more humiliating. The air outside was cool, biting against my skin. I searched the patio, the grass, my eyes darting to every corner, and then I saw it. Behind the shed, leaning against the wall, my cane. For a moment, I just stood there, staring at it like a lifeline. My fingers clenched. My heart ached. Behind me, laughter spilled from the kitchen window. Come on, Fiona, Melissa called. Smile, it's just a little prank. A little prank. I gripped the side of the shed to steady myself and made my slow, uneven way toward the cane. Each step scraped against my pride. When I finally reached it, I picked it up and felt an unexpected wave of calm. It wasn't just a piece of metal and wood, it was the only thing keeping me upright, both literally and metaphorically. I turned toward the window where they were still laughing and, for the first time in years, I didn't feel sad. I felt cold, completely, terrifyingly cold. I went back inside, cane clicking against the floor with measured precision. Their laughter died down when they saw my face. Come on, Jared muttered, shifting uncomfortably. It was funny. No, I said softly. It was cruel. Melissa rolled her eyes. Oh, lighten up, Fiona. It's not that deep. It is when it's at someone's expense, I replied. My voice didn't rise, but it didn't need to. It carried enough weight to make them fall silent. I went to my room, closed the door, and locked it. My hands trembled as I leaned my cane against the wall and sat on the edge of the bed. My reflection in the mirror looked older than 43, tired, worn, but awake in a way I hadn't been before. The humiliation burned in my chest, but beneath it was something else. Resolve. They wanted to turn my weakness into a joke. They wanted to make me feel small. But I wasn't small. I'd survived car wrecks, loss, and years of silent grief. I'd rebuilt myself piece by piece. And now, they were about to learn that the quiet ones, the ones they underestimate, are often the most dangerous. I sat in that room for hours, thinking about the will, about Patrick's estate, about how much they didn't know. Patrick had trusted me with everything, the accounts, the trust, the property deeds. I'd spent years managing it responsibly. Melissa and Jared believed that when they turned 25, the inheritance automatically became theirs. But they were wrong. The trust didn't transfer automatically. Patrick had written specific conditions only I could change. And I could change them. That realization settled over me like armor. I wasn't powerless. I never had been. I'd simply chosen peace over control. But peace wasn't working anymore. I looked at the family photo on my nightstand, the four of us smiling in front of the old oak tree. Back then, we looked like a real family. Now, I wasn't sure what we were. All I knew was this. If they wanted to play games, I could play too. Only mine wouldn't be recorded for laughs. Mine would be written in silence, in ink, in law, the kind of joke that doesn't get undone. That was the exact moment I decided to teach them what real loss feels like. I knew where the power truly lay in this family, and it wasn't in their hands. That night, while the house was quiet and their laughter still echoed faintly in my memory, I sat in my study with my cane resting beside me and Patrick's old leather-bound file on my lap. Inside were the trust documents, the ones his lawyer had prepared before his death. I hadn't opened them in years, not since the estate was settled. But now, I read every line with the focus of someone searching for ammunition. Patrick had been meticulous. He always thought ahead, even when it came to his children. The will stated that I would have full control over his assets until both Melissa and Jared reached the age of 30. Not 25, as they believed. 30. That was 7 more years of authority in my hands. 7 years in which I could do anything I pleased with the trust. A small, cold smile touched my lips. They had no idea. They thought I was weak, the woman they could mock and manipulate. But they didn't realize I held the key to everything they wanted. Patrick once told me, "Money doesn't ruin people, Fiona. It just unmasks who they already are." I hadn't understood him then, but I did now. The masks had fallen, and what I saw beneath them disgusted me. I pulled out my laptop and logged into the estate account. The numbers stared back at me, the inheritance Patrick had left behind. It was more than I remembered. 7 figures. Enough to buy them comfort for life, or destroy them with temptation. I ran my hand over the screen, tracing the digits as if they could answer the ache in my chest. Then I took a deep breath and made my decision. I wasn't going to destroy them, but I wasn't going to hand them luxury after what they'd done either. They needed to learn the value of something more than money. They needed to understand loss, humility, and respect, lessons they'd never grasped because they'd never had to earn a thing. I remembered a conversation Patrick and I once had in this very room. He'd said, "If they ever lose their way, Fiona, promise me you'll bring them back even if it takes something drastic." At the time, I thought he meant love, but maybe what he really meant was consequence. I opened a locked drawer in the desk and pulled out a small, my safe. It was where I kept personal letters, old jewelry, and sentimental things I didn't want anyone touching. Hidden behind a canvas painting in my studio, it was practically invisible. No one knew it existed, not even Patrick. It was my one secret sanctuary. I decided that would be where the truth and their inheritance would go. But not just yet. I wanted the setup to be perfect. Revenge isn't rage, it's strategy. And I had both time and control on my side. Over the next few days, I kept up my routine as if nothing had happened. I went about my chores, watered my plants, attended my physical therapy appointments. I didn't bring up the prank, didn't scold them, didn't even mention it. If anything, I was more polite than ever. I knew that would unsettle them more than anger ever could. They texted occasionally shallow messages about errands, asking for grocery money, pretending everything was normal. I replied with the same calm civility. All the while, I was preparing. At night, when the world went still, I printed out revised copies of Patrick's trust documents, updates that changed distribution conditions. I didn't need to forge anything illegal. All I had to do was use the authority Patrick had already given me. I delayed their access indefinitely, citing unmet behavioral and moral development requirements. Mrs. Darrow, the family lawyer, would help finalize it once I was ready. Each keystroke felt liberating. The quiet power of it filled the room, the kind that doesn't scream but commands. I gathered the updated paperwork, along with several account statements and letters Patrick had written before his death, and placed them into a sealed envelope. I labeled it, "For Melissa and Jared, when they're ready." The irony made me smile. They wouldn't see that envelope again for a long, long time. The next day, I went to my studio, my refuge. The room smelled faintly of paint and turpentine, the scent of my peace. I stood before one of my larger canvases, a landscape Patrick had loved. I stared at it for a long while, then carefully removed it from the wall. Behind it was the small steel safe. I entered the code and opened it. Inside, I placed the envelope, their inheritance, their future, and locked it away. I ran my hand over the cool metal door, whispering, "Let's see how you handle not knowing." I stepped back and rehung the painting. The brushstrokes of the sunset across the canvas almost seemed to smirk back at me. They had hidden my cane, thinking it was harmless fun. But I had just hidden something far more important, and unlike their prank, mine would leave a lasting mark. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat by the fireplace. The house felt different, quieter, but not lonely. Empowered. I looked at Patrick's portrait again. "I think you'd understand," I said aloud. "You wanted me to guide them. I'm just taking a different route." His painted eyes seemed to watch me with that same tender patience he always had. I thought about Melissa's giggle, Jared's mocking smirk, the phone camera shaking as they filmed me struggling without my cane. They thought it was hilarious. But they hadn't realized they were mocking the very person holding their entire future. Maybe someday they'd thank me. But for now, they'd get a lesson far more valuable than any check could provide. I finished my wine, turned off the lights, and went upstairs to bed. As I leaned my cane against the nightstand, I couldn't help but laugh quietly, to myself. For the first time in years, I wasn't the victim in this house. I was the author, the director, the one writing the ending. They thought their prank was funny, but the real game had just begun. Revenge doesn't always come in fire and fury sometimes. It comes in silence. After locking their inheritance away, something inside me shifted. I didn't feel angry anymore, just calm. Cold, steady calm. I didn't need to yell or punish them in obvious ways. They'd never learn from confrontation, they'd only learn from consequence. And I was going to make sure they faced it one quiet, calculated moment at a time. The next few days were a performance, and I played my role flawlessly. When Melissa called to ask if I wanted to go shopping, I said yes. When Jared dropped by with coffee, pretending to check in, I smiled and thanked him like nothing had ever happened. They looked surprised at how cheerful I seemed. Good, let them think I'd moved on. At brunch, Melissa laughed about the prank again, saying, "You should have seen your face when you couldn't find the cane, Fiona. We were dying." I smiled faintly and replied, "I bet you were." She didn't notice the edge in my tone. People rarely do when they're too busy congratulating themselves. Inside, I kept a running tally. Every word, every smirk, every sign of entitlement. By the end of the week, I had enough mental notes to fill a book, but instead, I decided to make it official. I opened a small notebook and began documenting their behavior. Dates, times, quotes. It wasn't for legal use, not yet, but it made me feel grounded, organized, focused. Once I had that, I scheduled a private meeting with Mrs. Darrow, Patrick's lawyer and my trusted confidant. Her office smelled faintly of old books and lavender, and she greeted me warmly as always. "Fiona, it's been a while. What brings you in?" "I need to make some updates to the trust," I said, placing the folder on her desk. "Patrick's children haven't exactly lived up to his expectations." Her brows rose slightly, but she didn't comment. She'd known the family long enough to read between the lines. "What sort of updates?" she asked carefully. "I'd like to suspend access to their inheritance indefinitely," I said, my voice steady, "until they show proof of financial responsibility and personal growth. I'll determine when that's been met." Mrs. Darrow hesitated. "You're aware this will likely cause tension, perhaps even legal challenge." "I am," I replied. "But I also know what Patrick wanted. He didn't want his children turning into spoiled adults who believe money grows from grief. He wanted them to grow first." She studied me for a long moment before nodding. "I'll prepare the amendment. You'll need to sign and notarize it." We finalized everything within an hour. When I signed my name at the bottom of the updated trust, I felt a strange sense of liberation. The kind that comes not from vengeance, but from reclaiming control. Before I left, I handed her a sealed envelope. "What's this?" she asked. "Something for safekeeping," I said. "If anything ever happens to me, I want you to deliver it to Melissa and Jared. But not before." She turned it over in her hands, curiosity flickering in her eyes. "Can I ask what's inside?" "Clarity," I said simply. It wasn't entirely a lie. Inside was a letter containing clues about the hidden inheritance. Not the exact location, but enough that, if they truly cared and matured, they might one day find it. A test of compassion and patience, wrapped in mystery. Mrs. Darrow smiled faintly. "You've always been one for symbolism. Art and justice aren't so different," I replied, standing. "Both require vision." When I left her office, the sky was a gentle shade of gray. Rain clouds were gathering, and the wind tugged softly at my coat as if whispering that the storm ahead was of my own making. I welcomed it. Back home, I moved to the studio, my sanctuary again. The smell of paint thinner and oil colors grounded me as I began my next piece. It was a large, abstract painting, full of deep reds and muted golds. I poured every emotion into it, my anger, my grief, my determination. Each brushstroke was deliberate, layered, and heavy with meaning. When I finished, I stood back to look at it. It wasn't beautiful in a traditional sense. It was raw, defiant. And behind it, hidden in the same small safe, was everything they believed they were owed. I smiled to myself. "Let's see if you can earn it," I whispered. Over the following days, I continued acting the doting stepmother. I texted Melissa encouragement about her upcoming sponsorships. I listened to Jared ramble about business ventures he never followed through on. I made them dinner. I even laughed at their jokes. But they didn't notice that my laughter never reached my eyes. When I looked at them, I didn't see family anymore. I saw lessons that needed to be taught. At night, I started painting more landscapes, portraits, anything that helped me channel my quiet fury into color. It became a kind of therapy, and oddly enough, peace began to find me again. I'd learned long ago that sometimes, silence is the sharpest weapon. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't demand attention. It just waits, patient and steady, until the moment strikes. A week later, I received an email from Mrs. Darrow confirming everything was updated and legally binding. The inheritance was locked down under my sole authority until I declared otherwise. I forwarded the confirmation to my personal folder and deleted every trace of it from the shared family email. They would have no idea. That night, I poured myself another glass of wine and stood in the middle of my studio, staring at the new painting, the one hiding the safe. The reds glowed under the warm lamplight, almost like embers. I ran my fingers along the edge of the canvas and whispered, "Let them burn themselves before they ever touch this." The satisfaction was quiet but complete. I didn't need revenge that screamed. I needed one that taught. I cleaned my brushes, turned off the lights, and went upstairs. As I climbed, my cane tapped, rhythmically against the steps, slow, steady, and sure. Every click was a heartbeat of victory. When I looked at that painting, I saw the start of a masterpiece they'd never understand. They had no idea their little joke had triggered something much larger than they could handle. It started subtly. I wanted to see how far their arrogance would stretch before reality snapped it. So, one morning over coffee, I announced that I'd been thinking about moving. The house had become too big, I said casually, stirring sugar into my cup. Melissa looked up from her phone immediately. "Moving?" she asked. "Like, selling the house?" "Yes," I replied, taking a slow sip. "It's just too much space for one person. I'm considering downsizing." Jared frowned. "Wait, what do you mean by downsizing? You can't just sell Dad's house." "I can," I said gently. "Legally. It's in my name. And I'm not getting any younger." Melissa's smile faltered. "But this house is like our family home." "Is it?" I asked, tilting my head. "Because it doesn't feel like family has lived here for a while." The silence that followed was delicious in its awkwardness. They exchanged quick glances, trying to gauge whether I was serious. I was though they didn't need to know the full plan yet. Melissa recovered first, putting on her sugary voice. "Well, I mean, maybe we can help you manage it. You don't have to move out. Jared and I can stay more often, help around, keep you company." I smiled faintly. "That's thoughtful, Melissa. But I've already started looking at smaller places. Something quieter. Jared leaned forward, his voice sharp. So, what happens to the estate when you move? You're not just selling, I finished for him. Yes, I am. The proceeds will go into the family trust, of course. He blinked. The trust? Yes, I said smoothly, watching realization dawn on his face. You do remember the trust, don't you? He shifted uncomfortably, as if suddenly aware that he didn't know as much as he thought he did. Melissa, trying to keep her composure, asked, So, when will we, get our shares? Your shares? I repeated softly, pretending to think. Oh, sweetheart, that won't be for a long while yet. Her lips parted, ready to protest, but no words came out. She didn't even know the details, she'd never bothered to read them. She just assumed. They both did. Later that day, I stood by the window, watching them leave in a huff. Their car door slammed. Melissa's voice carried through the open air. She's losing it. I swear, she's trying to control us. If only she knew how right she was. The next morning, I called Mrs. Darrow to confirm that the new trust amendments had been successfully filed. She assured me they had. You now have complete discretion, Fiona. No distributions can be made without your signature. Perfect, I said. Thank you. I spent that afternoon sorting through old boxes in the attic, photographs, Patrick's letters, and a few old keepsakes from when the kids were young. I found one photo that made me pause. Melissa and Jared sitting beside me on the porch, all three of us smiling. It was taken only months after Patrick's death. Back then, we still looked like a team. I sighed and tucked it into a drawer. Later, I called Melissa and invited both of them over for dinner. There's something important I want to discuss, I told them. I could almost hear the greed spark behind their polite tone when they agreed. They were expecting good news, maybe an early inheritance, maybe a transfer of property, but I had other plans. When they arrived that evening, the tension in the air was almost electric. Melissa had dressed up as if attending a business meeting. Jared had shaved and even brought a bottle of wine, which he rarely did unless he wanted something. I greeted them warmly, acting like the same gentle Fiona they thought they knew. I cooked their favorite meal, roasted chicken, garlic potatoes, and caramelized carrots, and served it with a smile. Something smells amazing, Melissa said, her tone a little too bright. It's an old recipe, I replied. Patrick loved it. Her expression faltered briefly at the mention of his name. They rarely spoke of their father anymore, too busy fighting over what he'd left behind to remember who he was. We made small talk for a while. Then, when dessert was done and the plates were cleared, I folded my hands and said, There's a matter we should discuss before I make any big life changes. They both leaned in immediately. What kind of changes? Jared asked. I'll be honest, I said softly. Maintaining this house alone is exhausting, and financially, it doesn't make sense to keep it. Melissa frowned. But if you sell it, what happens to everything inside? The furniture, Dad's stuff, all will be handled, I interrupted calmly. Don't worry. You'll get what's fair. What's fair? Jared repeated, incredulous. It's our father's house. Yes, I said quietly. And your father trusted me to manage it wisely. Which is exactly what I'm doing. He scoffed. You're unbelievable. Maybe, I said, standing slowly with the help of my cane. But I'm also in charge. Don't forget that. They glared at me, speechless for once. I didn't yell. I didn't even raise my voice. The calmness unnerved them more than any shouting could have. I've done everything I can for you, I continued. And this is how you repay me? By mocking the very thing that kept me alive when your father died? Melissa's face went pale. Jared looked down, suddenly unable to meet my eyes. Dad wouldn't have wanted this, he muttered. I nodded slowly. You're right. He wanted his children to be kind. But tell me, Jared, do you think he'd be proud of what you've become? He didn't answer. He just clenched his jaw and looked away. When they left, they didn't say goodbye. The front door slammed hard enough to rattle the picture frames. I stood there, cane in hand, listening to the sound of their car pulling out of the driveway. Then, slowly, I smiled. They were beginning to feel it, the uncertainty, the powerlessness. The cracks were forming, and I wasn't done yet. That night I wrote another entry in my journal. You can't teach compassion with comfort. You teach it with consequence. I closed the notebook, turned off the lamp, and rested my cane against the chair. Outside, thunder rumbled softly in the distance, like applause for the show that had just begun. But their panic was only the beginning soon. They'd learn just how deep I'd buried the truth. The more they pushed, the more I smiled because the trap was already set. In the weeks following that dinner, Melissa and Jared changed overnight. Gone were the cutting jokes, the condescending tones, the impatience that dripped from every conversation. Suddenly, they were polite, helpful. The same people who once mocked the sound of my cane now insisted on carrying groceries, washing dishes, even offering to mow the lawn. If I hadn't known better, I might have believed they were turning over a new leaf. But I did know better. I'd raised them long enough to recognize manipulation when I saw it. Their sudden affection wasn't born from remorse, it was desperation. They wanted access to the trust. Melissa arrived almost daily, bringing flowers, chocolates, and stories about how much she missed our bonding time. She'd sit on the couch, legs crossed neatly, pretending to scroll through her phone while her eyes darted toward my study door. She thought I didn't notice, but I did. Jared, on the other hand, tried a different tactic: flattery. He complimented my cooking, my art, even my wardrobe. He offered to drive me places, something he'd never done before unless it benefited him. It was amusing watching them scramble. One evening, as Melissa was helping me in the kitchen, she leaned casually against the counter and said, "So, Fiona, about the trust. When Dad set it up, he didn't want things to be complicated, right?" I smiled, chopping onions without looking up. "Complicated? No. Thorough? Yes." She laughed softly, trying to sound casual. Right. I was just wondering, when people reach a certain age, don't they automatically get what's theirs?" "Oh, not always," I said lightly, placing the knife down. "Sometimes, life teaches us that the things we think we deserve need to be earned first." She didn't respond. Her smile froze for half a second before she changed the subject. I could practically hear her frustration boiling beneath that fake charm. Later that week, Jared stopped by alone. He brought me takeout, my favorite, which I knew Melissa must have told him, and casually mentioned that he'd been trying to get his finances in order. He asked if I could advise him on budgeting, knowing full well that what he really wanted was access to the inheritance. I played along. "You're taking responsibility," I said with a nod. "I'm proud of you," he grinned. "Yeah, I figured it's about time. Start investing. Maybe expand Dad's business legacy." "Your father's business doesn't exist anymore, Jared," I interrupted softly. "You sold what was left of it 3 years ago for a motorcycle and a trip to Vegas." The grin vanished. "That was a mistake," he muttered. "Most lessons are," I said, standing up with the help of my cane. "But I'm glad you're learning." He left, soon after, clearly irritated that I hadn't taken the bait. That night, I sat in the living room, journal open, writing my observations. They're circling like vultures, but I hold the bones they want. The power of silence, I'd learned, was intoxicating. I didn't need to lie, threaten, or even raise my voice. All I had to do was wait. The next morning, I decided to give them what they craved most: hope. I sent a message in the family group chat: "Dinner at my place this Saturday. There's something important I'd like to discuss about the estate." It took less than a minute for Melissa to respond. "We'll be there." Jared followed with a thumbs-up emoji. For the next few days, I watched them behave like perfect children. Melissa cleaned the kitchen, humming while she did it. Jared repaired the broken garden gate without being asked. The irony wasn't lost on me. They were finally behaving like decent human beings, but only because they thought money was at stake. Saturday arrived, gray and windy, the kind of day that makes the air hum with anticipation. I spent the morning preparing their favorite meal again, just as I had the last time, but this time, there was something almost ritualistic about it. Every ingredient, every motion, felt deliberate, as though I were crafting the final scene of a play. When they arrived that evening, they were all politeness and charm. Melissa handed me a bouquet of white lilies. Jared complimented the house. Tyler, tagging along as usual, greeted me with exaggerated warmth. I smiled at all of them, serene as ever. Dinner went smoothly, laughter flowing easily, though I could see their eyes flicker with restrained curiosity. When dessert plates were cleared, I set my cane beside me and folded my hands on the table. "I've been doing some thinking," I began. "About the future." Melissa's shoulders straightened. Jared's fingers tapped the table. "I've realized there are certain matters regarding your father's estate that we need to finalize. I continued. And it's time you both knew where things stand. They leaned in. The silence in the room grew thick enough to taste. I spoke with Mrs. Darrow, I said slowly, and made some updates to the trust. Jared's expression tightened. Updates? Yes. I've ensured the funds will remain protected until certain personal growth milestones are met. Melissa frowned. Personal growth? What does that even mean? It means, I said, smiling softly, you'll have to prove you can manage what you inherit without letting greed or pride ruin you. Melissa laughed nervously, thinking I was joking. You can't be serious. I'm very serious, I replied. My tone even. The inheritance is secure, but it's no longer a guarantee. Consider it incentive to become the people your father wanted you to be. Jared pushed back his chair abruptly. This is ridiculous. Maybe, I said, standing slowly, gripping my cane. But it's legal. He looked ready to explode. Melissa's face flushed red. Tyler muttered something under his breath. I just smiled and began clearing the table, ignoring the storm brewing around me. When they finally left that night, slamming the door behind them, I didn't feel anger. I felt peace. Real, bone-deep peace. Because now, they weren't just reacting, they were unraveling. Later, I sat at my desk and wrote a letter to Patrick, sealing it with trembling hands. I told him I missed him. I told him the children had lost their way, but that I was guiding them back in my own way. You always said love teaches best through truth, I wrote. This is my truth. I folded the letter and placed it in the painting's safe, alongside the inheritance documents. By the weekend, they'd get exactly what they asked for, a lesson. The dinner began with fake smiles and ended with real chaos. By Saturday evening, everything was in motion. I had spent the day preparing the house, polishing the dining table, lighting candles, and arranging the good china that hadn't been used since Patrick's last birthday. I wanted the setting to feel special, formal, even sacred. It wasn't just another dinner. It was a reckoning disguised as hospitality. Melissa and Jared arrived right on time, dressed far too nicely for a casual family meal. Melissa wore a sleek emerald dress, her hair perfectly styled, while Jared showed up in a suit jacket and tie, a rare sight for someone who spent most days in sweatpants. Their performances were almost impressive. Almost. They brought a bottle of expensive wine and a box of macarons, pretending thoughtfulness. Just a little thank you for everything you've done, Melissa said sweetly, her tone dripping with insincerity. I smiled and accepted it as though I believed her. We sat down at the table. I had made roasted lamb with garlic potatoes and a salad with citrus dressing. The conversation began light, forced, full of empty compliments. Melissa commented on how beautifully kept the house looked, as if she hadn't once complained that it smelled like old people. Jared talked about his new business opportunities, none of which sounded remotely real. Tyler, sitting beside Melissa, occasionally threw in meaningless affirmations to impress her. I let them talk, let them fill the silence with their shallow words, waiting patiently for the right moment to shift the atmosphere. When the plates were nearly empty, I set down my fork, straightened my back, and said calmly, "Before dessert, I have something important to share with both of you." Melissa exchanged a nervous glance with Jared, their excitement barely concealed. They were certain this was about money. I could see it in their eyes, the same greedy gleam Patrick once worried about. "You both know your father's estate has been under my care," I began. "As time has gone on, I've had to make decisions that align with his wishes." Jared nodded, pretending to be patient. "Of course. We trust you." I smiled faintly. "Do you?" Melissa gave a forced laugh. "Well, obviously. You've always looked out for us." "Interesting," I said softly, folding my hands. "Because the way you've treated me lately doesn't reflect much trust or respect." Jared's posture stiffened. "Fiona, we already said we were sorry about that stupid prank." "Sorry?" I interrupted. "You recorded me struggling to walk. You hid the one thing that gives me mobility and laughed while I tried to find it." "That's not a prank, Jared. That's cruelty." His jaw clenched, but he didn't reply. I reached under the table and lifted 2 small envelopes, placing one in front of each of them. "I thought it would be best to let you both see what comes next." "Go ahead, open them." Melissa looked at Jared, then carefully tore hers open. Jared followed. Inside, each envelope contained a single printed sheet. Not bank details, not property deeds, Just screenshots of the video they had taken of me the day they hid my cane. The footage clearly showed their laughter, the taunting, the mockery, the joy they took in my pain. The room fell silent. Melissa's hand trembled as she held the paper. Jared's face turned red, his jaw tightening. Tyler stared at the images, wide-eyed, clearly uncomfortable. "I kept a copy," I said quietly. "For legal reasons, of course. In case I ever needed to remind myself of the truth." Melissa finally spoke, her voice cracking. "Fiona, that was months ago. We didn't mean, oh, you meant it," I cut in sharply. "You both meant every laugh, every word. But that's not what matters now." I stood, leaning on my cane, looking at them the way a teacher looks at failing students. "What matters is what you've learned since then." Melissa's eyes filled with tears. Jared tried to maintain his composure, but his voice trembled. "So what is this? Are you trying to punish us?" "No," I said evenly. "I'm teaching you. Your father left you both an inheritance, but you're not ready for it. Not yet. You haven't earned it. And until you do, that money will remain untouchable." Jared pushed back from the table. "You can't do that." "I already did," I replied calmly. "The documents are legally binding. Mrs. Darrow finalized everything last week." He slammed his hand on the table, startling Melissa. "You've gone insane. Dad never wanted this." I met his glare without flinching. "Your father wanted his children to grow up to be decent people. He trusted me to make sure that happened, and if this is what it takes, then so be it." Melissa started crying. Real tears, this time not the manipulative kind she used when she wanted sympathy. "Fiona, please, this isn't fair. We made a mistake, okay? We were stupid." I walked around the table slowly, each tap of my cane echoing in the tense silence. "Fair?" I repeated. "You humiliated me for sport, you called me a burden, and now you're crying over money? Fairness doesn't seem to be something you ever cared about until it stopped favoring you." Tyler finally stood, awkwardly clearing his throat. "Maybe we should just go, Mel." "Sit down," Melissa hissed at him, panic flashing in her eyes. I leaned forward slightly, looking her dead in the eye. "You both wanted to play games," I said softly. "Now you're in one. And the rules are simple: learn empathy or lose everything." The silence that followed was unbearable. You could hear the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Jared stared at the photo on the wall, Patrick's smiling face as though searching for backup from a ghost. "Fiona," he said finally, his voice low and shaking. "What did you do?" I smiled faintly. "Exactly what your father would have done. I protected what's his." Melissa stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. Her mascara streaked down her cheeks. "You can't just take away our future. Your future," I said quietly, "was never built on my mercy. It was built on your choices. And now, you get to live with them." She let out a choked sob, grabbed her purse, and stormed toward the door. Jared followed after a few seconds, muttering curses under his breath. Tyler trailed behind, silent, clearly regretting every moment he'd been there. When the front door finally slammed shut, the house fell into perfect, beautiful silence. I exhaled slowly and sank into my chair, my cane resting across my lap. For the first time since Patrick's death, I felt like I had truly stood up for myself, even if it meant standing alone. Melissa's fork clattered to the floor as Jared's voice trembled. "What did you do?" "I didn't raise monsters, but I did let them grow that way. That ends now." After that explosive dinner, the house was silent again. No texts, no calls, no visits. For the first time in years, my phone didn't buzz with demands for money or attention. It was peaceful, too peaceful. I knew it wouldn't last. Guilt doesn't settle quietly when it meets entitlement. It festers, turns to anger, and eventually comes crawling back, disguised as outrage. 3 days later, my doorbell rang. When I opened the door, Melissa stood there, her eyes red from crying but her chin lifted high, like she was trying to hold on to the last of her pride. Jared wasn't with her. "Can we talk?" she asked. I stepped aside, motioning her in. She didn't speak as she sat on the couch, crossing her legs tightly, clutching her phone like it was a weapon. I could tell she'd rehearsed this conversation in her head. "Look," she began. "I know we went too far with the prank. I know it hurt you. But freezing us out of Dad's inheritance, that's extreme." "Extreme," I repeated, settling into my armchair. "You filmed me struggling to walk, Melissa. You mocked a disability. And now you want to talk about extreme? She swallowed hard. It was stupid. We didn't think. But that doesn't mean we deserve to lose everything. I leaned forward slightly, my tone soft but unwavering. Do you know what losing everything feels like? Because I do. I lost my husband, my health, my peace, and still, I showed you love. What did you give in return? Melissa's lips parted, but no words came. Her eyes darted away, as if looking anywhere but at me might erase her shame. Your father trusted me with his legacy, I continued, and he made me promise that if his children ever lost their way, I'd guide them back. That's all I'm doing. Guiding. Her voice cracked. By punishing us? By protecting you. From yourselves. She sat in silence for a long moment, then her tone changed softer, smaller. What about Jared? Did you talk to him? I sighed. No. I imagine he's too angry to face me. Melissa hesitated before whispering. He's furious. He said you're manipulating everything, that you're trying to rewrite Dad's will. I didn't rewrite it, I said calmly. I followed it. Every clause, every condition. The only thing I changed was how long it'll take before you can touch a cent. Her jaw clenched, tears welling again. So, there's really nothing we can do? There's always something you can do, I said. You can change. She scoffed, standing abruptly. Change? That's your condition? You're holding our inheritance hostage until we become saints? No, I said, gripping my cane as I stood. Until you become decent. She stared at me, chest rising and falling quickly, then turned toward the door. You're cruel, Fiona. I didn't stop her. I didn't raise my voice. I simply said, No, Melissa. I'm honest. There's a difference. She slammed the door behind her. That night, I sat alone in the quiet, sipping tea and staring at the flicker of the fireplace. The flames twisted and cracked softly, their warmth washing over me as I thought about the years I'd spent trying to love those children into better versions of themselves. But love without boundaries only breeds monsters. And I had let them grow unchecked for too long. The next day, I got a call from Mrs. Darrow. Both Melissa and Jared have contacted me, she said gently. They're demanding access to the trust. I've told them the documents are sealed until you authorize otherwise. Good, I replied. And the envelope? Still locked in my cabinet per your instructions, she said. That envelope. The one labeled for Melissa and Jared when they're ready. It contained clues, not answers, symbols only they could decode if they had the patience and empathy to work together. I doubted they were ready for that yet. Don't release it, I told her. Not until I say so. Understood, she replied. Fiona, may I ask something? Of course. Do you really think they'll come around? I paused, watching the firelight dance against the walls. I don't know, I admitted. But I need to believe they can. Otherwise, everything Patrick built, everything I've tried to hold together dies with me. She was silent for a moment, then said softly, You're stronger than you realize. After we hung up, I felt an odd mix of exhaustion and relief. For the first time, I was no longer trying to be liked. I was simply doing what needed to be done. Days turned into weeks. The silence stretched longer, heavier. I filled the quiet with painting, losing myself in colors that spoke the words I couldn't say aloud. Reds for anger, blues for grief, gold for hope. Sometimes I'd glance at Patrick's photo and wonder what he'd think of me now. Would he approve of how far I'd gone to protect his children? Or would he think I'd become the villain they saw me as? But then I remembered his voice, soft but certain, saying, You always see the best in people, Fiona. That's your strength and your curse. Maybe he was right. Maybe I had seen the best in Melissa and Jared for too long. But now, it was time they saw the worst in themselves. A week later, Melissa called. Her tone was subdued, almost broken. I just wanted to say, I get it, what you're doing. I still think it's cruel, but maybe we needed it. Her honesty caught me off guard. That's a start, I said. Then she asked, her voice shaking, Is there any way for us to fix this? To earn it back? There's always a way, I said softly. But it doesn't start with money. What does it start with? Compassion, I replied. For me, for each other, for your father's memory. She was silent for a long while, then whispered, I'll try. And for the first time in years, I believed her. When the call ended, I looked at the flames again, and for a brief, fleeting moment, I saw Patrick's reflection dancing in them, smiling, proud. Maybe, just maybe, I was doing the right thing. The sound was music not because it hurt her, but because it meant she finally felt something real. When you take everything for granted, even love becomes invisible. The following weeks passed in a strange kind of quiet. The storm had broken, but what lingered was not peace, it was reflection. The air in the house felt lighter, calmer. For the first time since Patrick's death, I could move through each room without feeling like I was walking through the shadow of what used to be. But underneath that calm, I could sense something shifting in Melissa and Jared. Distance has a way of turning anger into thought, and thought into guilt if you let it. Melissa was the first to reach out. She sent an email, not a text. That in itself was unusual. Emails take effort, texts don't. Her message was simple. Fiona, I'm sorry. For the video, for the words, for everything. I was cruel, and you didn't deserve it. I've been thinking about Dad a lot lately. I think I forgot what he'd want me to be. I'm sorry. I read it twice before closing my laptop. No reply, not yet. I needed time to see if her remorse would take root, or if it was just another plea to get what she wanted. Jared, however, didn't write apologies. He sent accusations. His first message was a short, angry paragraph. I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but this isn't what Dad wanted. You're not his wife anymore. You're just someone who lucked into control. We'll fight this if we have to. The words didn't sting the way they once would have. They just confirmed what I already knew Jared wasn't ready to learn. Not yet. He was still fighting the loss of control, still clinging to entitlement as his identity. I didn't respond to him either. Silence is its own teacher, and he needed to sit in it. Instead, I focused on rebuilding myself. I joined an art therapy group at the community center, something I'd always meant to do but never found the courage for. It was full of people who carried their own quiet pain, widows, veterans, accident survivors. People like me, who understood that healing doesn't always mean returning to what you were before. Sometimes it means learning to live as someone new. Every Thursday, we gathered in a room that smelled faintly of turpentine and acrylic paint, and for 2 hours, I could breathe without remembering. I painted everything I couldn't say, the ache of love lost, the betrayal of those I called family, the bittersweet peace of letting go. It didn't erase the hurt, but it gave it shape, color, and finally, boundaries. One afternoon after class, I lingered behind as the others left. My instructor, a kind woman named Joyce, looked over my latest canvas, a woman standing tall with a broken cane lying at her feet. Who's she? Joyce asked gently. She's me, I said. Or maybe she's who I'm trying to become, Joyce smiled. Then she's already there. I didn't realize until later how much I needed to hear that. A week later, Mrs. Darrow called. Fiona, you should know both Melissa and Jared reached out again. They're asking about the sealed envelope. I took a slow breath. Did you tell them anything? Of course not, she said. I reminded them it's under my protection until you authorize release. Good. Keep it that way. I will. But Fiona? She hesitated. Melissa sounded different this time. Quieter. Thoughtful. Jared, though he's still angry, desperate. I expected as much, I said. Desperation always fights louder than remorse. After we hung up, I went to my studio and looked at the painting that hid the safe, their inheritance buried behind layers of paint and meaning. I thought about Melissa's apology, about Jared's resentment, and how two people could be raised in the same home yet grow into such opposite souls. Maybe that was my fault. Maybe in trying to love them equally, I had failed to teach them differently. Love without truth had spoiled them, and truth without love was what I was giving them now, hoping it would finally balance the scales. That night, as rain tapped against the windows, I sat with my journal again. The pages were half filled with entries that charted my slow journey from pain to power. I turned to a blank one and wrote, "They think I took everything from them, but really, I gave them the one thing they never had the chance to earn, something real." I closed the journal and sat quietly, listening to the rhythm of the storm outside. The house didn't feel lonely anymore. It felt full of consequence, full of reflection, full of the ghosts that now felt more like company than tormentors. The next morning, I found another email from Melissa. I understand if you never forgive us, but I want you to know I've started volunteering at the local shelter. I needed to do something good, something real. Dad used to say that kindness starts when you stop thinking about yourself. I think I finally get what he meant. That one made me cry. Not out of sadness, but out of something softer. Maybe she truly was starting to change. Jared, on the other hand, sent another bitter message. You won't win. We'll find that money. I didn't even bother opening the attachment. I deleted it and moved on with my day. Some lessons take longer to sink in. Some never do. Later, at my art group, Joyce asked us to paint something we've lost and found again. I painted a single cane standing upright this time, its reflection in a puddle forming the faint outline of wings. It wasn't perfect, but it felt right. When I got home that evening, the answering machine light blinked red. Melissa's voice filled the room, hesitant but sincere. Hey Fiona, I just wanted to thank you for not giving up on us, even when we didn't deserve it. For a long moment I sat in silence, letting her words settle. Maybe this was working. Maybe the pain I'd caused had finally started to transform into growth. But deep down, I knew the story wasn't over yet. Jared's anger was a storm still gathering somewhere beyond the horizon, and storms, as I'd learned, always find their way home. I knew the next time we spoke would change everything again. Forgiveness is not forgetting, it's choosing who deserves another chance. It was a gray morning when Melissa showed up at my door again, weeks after her last call. I almost didn't recognize her at first. Her hair was tied in a messy bun, her eyes ringed with fatigue, and her once perfect manicure was chipped. She looked human, stripped of the glossy confidence she'd always worn like armor. I opened the door without saying a word. For a moment, we just stood there, two women on opposite sides of a chasm we both helped create. Hi, she said quietly. Can I come in? I stepped aside. She walked in slowly, glancing around the living room like it was a place she hadn't seen in years. The house was the same, but something in the air had changed, softer, quieter, as if it had been holding its breath waiting for this moment. She sat down on the couch, folding her hands in her lap. I won't take much of your time, she began. I need to say some things. I nodded, keeping my face neutral. Go ahead, she swallowed hard. I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about compassion and about Dad. I realized I've been chasing things that don't matter: likes, followers, approval from people who don't even know me. I thought that was success. Her voice wavered. But it's not. I stayed silent, letting her speak. She needed this more than I needed to hear it. I lost my sponsorship deals, she continued. After the video leaked, that made me blink. The video leaked? She nodded. Someone hacked my phone last month and posted it online. The comments were brutal. They called me heartless, privileged, disgusting. I wanted to hide forever. But after the initial humiliation, I started realizing they were right. Her voice cracked, and she looked down. That video showed me who I was, and I didn't like her. I exhaled slowly, setting my cane beside me. And now? Now, she said softly, I just want to be better. For a long while, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the soft ticking of the clock. Finally, I asked, Why are you really here, Melissa? She looked up, her eyes wet but determined. Because I want to earn back your trust. Not for the money for me. I want you to see that I can be someone worth believing in. Something in her tone, raw, unpolished, real, struck a chord in me. Maybe, finally, she was telling the truth. I leaned back in my chair, studying her. You can't undo the past, I said quietly. But you can learn from it. That's what forgiveness is: not erasing, but choosing to rebuild. She nodded, tears spilling freely now. I know I don't deserve it, but I'm asking anyway. For the first time in a long time, I felt my anger soften. Maybe this was the moment Patrick had hoped for when he made me promise to guide them. Maybe love, after all its bruises, could still find a way to stand. I gestured toward the studio. Come with me. She looked confused but followed. Inside, the smell of paint filled the air, thick with the scent of linseed oil and old wood. Dozens of canvases lined the walls, some finished, some half complete. At the center of the room stood the large painting that hid the safe, the one that held the inheritance. Melissa stared at it. I remember this one, she whispered. You started it before Dad died. I used to tease you about how boring it was. I smiled faintly. You did. Her eyes softened. It's beautiful, though. Peaceful. It's more than peaceful, I said quietly. It's truthful. I reached for a small brush and a palette knife, handing them to her. If you really want to prove you've changed, I said, Help me restore this painting. She blinked, startled. You want me to? Yes, but carefully. There's something inside this canvas that matters, something that belongs to you and Jared. I'll show you where to look. Her hands trembled as she took the brush. Together, we moved to the far right corner of the canvas. I guided her as she scraped lightly at the dried paint along the edge. A faint seam appeared. Her breath hitched. What is this? I stepped back. Keep going. She worked slowly, carefully, her strokes cautious and deliberate. After a few moments, she gasped as a thin slit of paper peeked through the layer of paint. I nodded for her to continue. When she finally pulled out the folded document, her fingers shook. She looked at me, tears glistening in her eyes. This is the trust, isn't it? It is, I said softly. The real one. The inheritance your father left for you and Jared. She stared down at it like it was something sacred. Why did you hide it here? Because you hid my cane, I said gently. And I wanted you to understand what it feels like to lose something important and to earn it back. Her face crumpled. You really did all this just to teach us? Yes, I whispered. Because love that never challenges you isn't love at all. It's indulgence. She clutched the papers to her chest and began to sob quietly. I placed a hand on her shoulder not to comfort, but to anchor her. When she finally looked up, her eyes were red but clear. I'll make this right, she said. Even if I never see a cent of this, I'll make it right. I believed her. For the first time, I truly did. That evening, we sat together on the porch, watching the sun sink low over the horizon. The air smelled like rain and redemption. Do you hate me? She asked suddenly. No, I said. I hate what you became, but I never stopped hoping you'd change. She nodded slowly, understanding. And Jared? I sighed. He's not ready yet. But maybe someday. She smiled faintly. He'll come around. Eventually. Maybe she was right. Or maybe she was being optimistic for both of us. Either way, for the first time, hope didn't feel foolish. The next morning, I called. Mrs. Darrow, release Melissa's portion, I said. Half, for now. The rest stays in trust until Jared is ready. Understood, she replied. I'll process it today. When I told Melissa, she shook her head in disbelief. You're serious? I am, I said. Half now, half when your brother finds his way. She burst into tears again, hugging me tightly. It felt different this time, not desperate, not manipulative, sincere, healing. When her brush hit the hidden seam and she gasped, I knew she had finally seen beyond herself. Sometimes, the path to redemption runs through honesty, not inheritance. The day after Melissa found the hidden trust, she came back to the house with trembling hands and swollen eyes. She'd clearly been crying for hours, but there was something different about her now, something unpolished yet real. She wasn't wearing makeup, her posture wasn't defensive. For the first time in years, she looked like the same young woman who once painted with Patrick and me on the porch, her cheeks flushed with sunlight instead of pride. Can I read it? She asked softly, holding the letter she'd found tucked inside the envelope with the trust. Of course, I said, gesturing toward the armchair by the window. It's yours now. She sat down, unfolded the letter, and began to read aloud. It wasn't from me, not exactly. It was the letter I'd written to Patrick, sealed inside that safe months ago, meant to remind anyone who found it what love and loss truly meant. Her voice quivered as she read, Patrick, I wish you could see what your children have become. I don't mean that cruelly, I mean it truthfully. They're lost. They've forgotten your kindness, your humility, your heart. But I haven't given up on them. I never will. I will protect what's left of your legacy, even if it means becoming someone they hate for a while. I'll make them remember who you were and who they could be again. Melissa's voice broke, but she kept reading. I'll teach them that compassion doesn't come from comfort, that respect isn't a right, it's earned. And when they finally learn that, I'll give them everything you left behind. Not because they demanded it, but because they finally deserved it. By the time she reached the end, she was crying so hard she could barely breathe. The letter slipped from her hands onto her lap. I sat beside her quietly, letting her sob. There was no need for words. The sound of her remorse was enough. When she finally spoke again, her voice was small. I never understood how much you loved Dad. Or how much you loved us. I thought you were just controlling. I smiled faintly. Love and control can look similar when you're still growing up. She nodded slowly. I used to tell myself you were cold. But you were just tired, weren't you? Tired of being the only one who cared. That one hit me deep. I swallowed the lump in my throat and said, yes, I was tired, but I never stopped caring. She reached for my hand. Her fingers were cold, trembling. I don't want the money anymore, she whispered. I just want to be someone you're proud of. I squeezed her hand gently. Then you already are. We sat in silence for a while, the afternoon sunlight spilling across the floor. The house felt alive again, not with noise or tension, but with something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Later, when she finally stood to leave, she turned back at the door and said, you know, I used to hate that cane. I chuckled softly. You and Jared both. But now, she said, smiling through tears, I think it's beautiful. Because you never stopped walking forward, even when we gave you every reason to stop. After she left, I called Mrs. Darrow. Release half of Melissa's share, I told her. The other half stays where it is until further notice. There was a pause on the line. She earned it, didn't she? Mrs. Darrow asked. Yes, I said, looking toward the studio door. She finally did. The next few days felt strangely light. Melissa sent me pictures of her volunteering at a local youth center, helping kids with art projects. She looked happy, truly happy, the kind of happiness that doesn't need to be posted or proven. As for Jared, he remained silent. No texts, no calls, nothing. I knew he'd taken the news about Melissa's partial inheritance badly. He always saw life as a competition, even with his own sister. I half expected him to show up at my door in anger again, but he didn't. The silence lingered like a shadow I couldn't quite name. That evening, I found myself sitting at Patrick's old writing desk, the one with the small drawer he'd kept his fountain pens in. I pulled out a clean sheet of paper and began to write another letter, this one to Jared. You are not your anger, I wrote. You are not your mistakes. But as long as you let pride be louder than love, you'll never hear the voice that could save you. The door isn't closed, Jared, but I can't open it for you. You'll have to knock. I sealed it in an envelope, but I didn't send it. Not yet. Some messages need the right moment to be heard. Later that night, I dreamed of Patrick. He was standing by the lake behind our old home, smiling at me. You did it, Fee, he said. You brought one of them back. I wanted to ask him about Jared, but before I could, he turned away, fading into the morning light. When I woke up, I realized I was smiling, the first genuine smile I'd worn in a long time. That morning, I brewed coffee and watched the sunrise spill across the kitchen counter. The house was still, peaceful, and for once I didn't feel lonely. I felt strong. I felt whole. Melissa texted later that day, I love you, Fiona. Thank you for not giving up on me. I stared at the message for a long moment before replying, always. And I meant it, because forgiveness doesn't erase the past, it redeems it. And maybe, just maybe, there was still hope for Jared too. But Jared's silence meant the storm wasn't over, not yet. Jared always believed money equaled power until he had none. A few months passed after Melissa's transformation. The days were calmer, quieter. She visited often, sometimes to paint, sometimes just to talk. It was strange how natural it felt to have her back, as if all the tension that once hung between us had finally melted into something gentle. We talked about Patrick, about her childhood, even about Jared. Each time his name came up, she'd sigh softly and say, He's lost, Fiona. He doesn't know how to live without something to fight against. I always nodded, because deep down, I knew she was right. Jared had never learned peace. He'd only learned how to win. Then, one evening, I got a call, the kind that begins with silence heavy enough to crush your heart. It was Jared. His voice was slurred, words dripping with resentment and liquor. You think you're some kind of saint, don't you? He sneered. Teaching us lessons, punishing us like we're kids. Jared, I said calmly, you sound drunk. We can talk when you're sober. Don't you dare hang up on me, he snapped. You gave Melissa her money, didn't you? Half the inheritance, right? Thought I wouldn't find out? I said nothing. Silence, I'd learned, was far more powerful than defense. He laughed bitterly. You've always hated me, haven't you? You took Dad from me, then his house, then his money. You act like you're some kind of guardian angel, but you're just a thief. That word stung, thief, but not because it was true. It stung because it reminded me of how blind he'd become. I took nothing from you, I said quietly. Everything I've done has been for you and your sister. For us? He spat. You mean for you? You think humiliating us makes you better? You're pathetic. There was a long pause. Then I said softly, do you know what's really pathetic, Jared? It's not losing money. It's losing the people who love you, and not even realizing why. He hung up. The line went dead, but the echo of his anger stayed in the room like smoke that wouldn't clear. I sat for a long time, staring at the silent phone. Melissa called later, her voice worried. He called me too. Said he was going to fix things his way. I think he's drinking again. My chest tightened. Jared had battled alcoholism since his early 20s. Patrick's death had nearly destroyed him, and though he'd sobered up for a few years, he'd fallen off that ledge before. Where is he? I asked. I don't know, she said. He stopped answering my texts. That night, sleep refused to come. I sat by the window, the moonlight spilling across the floor, and thought about the boy Jared used to be: curious, protective, funny in ways that could light up a room. I wondered when that boy had turned into this angry, hollow man chasing ghosts of money and control. 3 days later, Mrs. Darrow called. Fiona, I thought you should know. Jared reached out to me. My heart sank. What did he say? He wanted to access the trust, of course. I told him he couldn't. He yelled, made threats. I didn't engage, but he didn't sound well. He isn't, I murmured. Fiona. She hesitated, her voice gentle now. Sometimes losing everything is the only way people like Jared learn to rebuild. I closed my eyes, nodding silently. Then one afternoon, I got another call, this one from an unfamiliar number. It was a counselor from a rehabilitation center. Mrs. Graves? The voice asked. This is Nathan from Hopeview. Recovery. Your stepson, Jared Graves, checked in last night. He listed you as his emergency contact. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. He did what? He's in rough shape, Nathan continued. But he said something that stuck with me. He told us, my stepmom said I'd have to lose everything to find myself. I think she was right. My throat tightened, tears spilling before I could stop them. Is he safe? Yes. He's detoxing, but he's determined. You might want to visit when he stabilizes. I thanked him, my voice barely steady, and hung up. The house felt different that night, not lighter, not heavier, just still. Like the world was holding its breath again, waiting to see if redemption could stretch across yet another broken bridge. A week later, I went to visit him. Hopeview was tucked away on a quiet hill, surrounded by pine trees and soft gray fog. The air smelled like rain and second chances. Inside, Jared looked nothing like the man who'd called me in anger. He was thinner, pale, his hair unkempt, his eyes hollow but clearer somehow. When he saw me, he froze. You came. Of course I did, I said, sitting across from him. I told you I never stopped caring. He swallowed hard, his hands shaking. I was angry. I said things. I raised a hand gently. You were lost. You still are. But that's okay. You're here now. That's what matters. He nodded slowly, tears welling in his eyes. I didn't know where else to go. I didn't even want the money anymore. I just wanted to stop hating everything. I smiled sadly. That's the first real step you've taken in years. We talked for an hour, mostly about Patrick, about memories of better days. By the time I left, something in his face had softened, not completely, but enough to remind me that hope wasn't foolish after all. That night, I sat by the fireplace again, my cane resting against my knee, and whispered to the empty room, "You'd be proud of him, Patrick. He's finding his way." The flames flickered, and for a moment, I imagined Patrick's voice quiet, warm, saying, "You did it, Fee. You brought them home." I smiled, wiping away a tear. Maybe the inheritance wasn't just money after all. Maybe it was something deeper, the strength to rebuild, to forgive, to begin again. That was when I realized maybe losing everything had saved him. Peace doesn't come from revenge, it comes from release. Almost a year had passed since the day I'd hidden their inheritance. It felt like a lifetime ago, like that bitter, aching woman with shaking hands and bottled rage belonged to someone else entirely. The house was quieter now, but not lonely. Melissa visited often, bringing groceries or just dropping by to talk about her volunteer work. She had changed not just in how she spoke or acted, but in the way she existed. Her energy was softer, grounded. She smiled without forcing it. She laughed without cruelty. Every time I looked at her, I saw traces of Patrick, the patience in her gestures, the empathy in her voice. It made me proud, and it made me ache. Then, one crisp autumn morning, I received a call I hadn't expected so soon. It was Jared. His voice was steady, fragile, but steady. "Hey, Fiona," he said quietly. "I got out of Hopeview today. I wanted to see you." For a moment, I couldn't speak. Then I whispered, "Of course, come by any time." He arrived that afternoon. When I opened the door, I barely recognized him. He'd gained some weight back, his skin had color, and his eyes, once full of anger, now carried something different. Not regret, exactly. Humility. "Hi," he said, offering a tentative smile. "You look good." "So do you," I replied, meaning it. He nodded toward my cane. "I see you're still walking strong." "I always do," I said with a faint smirk. Inside, he looked around like he was seeing the place for the first time. Maybe he was. "It's weird," he murmured. "I used to hate this house. Every corner reminded me of Dad, but now it just feels like home again." "Maybe that's because you're ready to see it that way," I said. He nodded, sinking into the couch. There was a long silence before he finally said, "I'm sorry." "For what?" I asked softly. "For everything. For calling you names. For not understanding. For thinking you were the enemy." His voice broke slightly. I didn't realize how broken I was until I had nothing left to blame. I reached across the table and placed my hand over his. "You were grieving, Jared. We all were. But grief doesn't excuse cruelty, it just explains it." He looked down, tears glinting in his eyes. "I hurt Melissa too. I told her she was weak for forgiving you, but she's stronger than I'll ever be." "No," I said gently. "She just found her way sooner. You found yours now. That's what matters." He let out a shaky laugh. "You always talk like some kind of philosopher." I chuckled. "Occupational hazard. I've had a lot of time to think." We talked for hours about Patrick, about Hopeview, about how he'd met people there who made him realize what real loss looked like. "There was this guy," Jared said, "lost his wife and son in a fire. He said something that stuck with me. When you stop running from your pain, it stops chasing you. I think that's what I've been doing, running." I smiled softly. "Then it's time to walk, Jared. One step at a time." He grinned faintly. "You and that cane metaphor again." "Some things don't change," I said, laughing. Later that evening, Melissa joined us. She didn't know Jared was visiting, and when she saw him, she froze. For a second, I thought she might cry. Then she dropped her purse and ran to him, wrapping her arms around his shoulders. "Jared," she whispered, "you're really here." He hugged her back, his voice thick. "Yeah, I'm sorry, Mel, for everything." She shook her head, pulling back to look at him. "No, we both did awful things. But we're not those people anymore." Watching them embrace, something inside me finally unclenched. It felt like the walls of this house, once echoing with anger and silence, were breathing again. For the first time, we were a family, not just by name, but by choice. After dinner, we sat on the porch as the sun set. The air smelled of wood smoke and fallen leaves. Melissa leaned against the railing while Jared stared out at the yard, lost in thought. "I've been thinking," I said finally. "It's time we close this chapter." Melissa looked at me, confused. "What do you mean?" I reached for my phone and dialed Mrs. Darrow. "Hi, Margaret," I said. "It's Fiona. I'd like to release the rest of the inheritance to both of them, equally." There was a pause on the other end, then her calm voice. "Are you sure?" "Yes," I said, glancing at the two faces watching me. "They've earned it." When I hung up, Jared shook his head slowly. "You don't have to—" "I know," I interrupted. "But I want to." Money was never the problem. It was what it revealed. And I think we've all learned what we needed to. Melissa's eyes filled with tears again. "You really mean it?" "I do," I said. "The trust is yours not as a reward but as a responsibility. Use it wisely. Make your father proud." Jared looked away, blinking hard. "We will, I promise." For a long while, none of us spoke. We just sat there, watching the last light fade into twilight. I felt Patrick's presence in that silence, warm, approving, proud. Later, after Melissa and Jared left, Jared came back inside holding something in his hands. "I almost forgot," he said with a grin. "I got you something." He handed me a long, narrow box wrapped in brown paper. Inside was my cane polished, restored, and wrapped with a simple satin ribbon. A small engraving near the handle read, "For every step you took for us." I couldn't speak. My vision blurred as I traced the letters with my fingertips. "It's beautiful," I whispered. Jared smiled. "It was Melissa's idea, but I did the polishing." I laughed through my tears. "It's perfect." When they left, I stood by the window, holding that cane. The moonlight glinted off its handle, and I realized something profound. Revenge hadn't given me closure. Forgiveness had. But forgiveness wasn't about letting them off the hook. It was about freeing myself from the anger that chained me to the past. I sat by the fire that night, the house warm with memories, and whispered to the silence, "We made it, Patrick. Somehow, we made it." And when Jared handed me my cane that night, polished and wrapped in ribbon, I knew the cycle was complete. Sometimes justice doesn't mean destruction, it means rebuilding what was broken. A year after Jared's visit, the house didn't feel like the same place anymore. It was still the one Patrick and I had built, with the creaking floors and the faint scent of pine from the backyard. But it had changed, or maybe I had. The air didn't carry bitterness anymore. It carried warmth, laughter, and the faint hum of renewal. Melissa and Jared visited every Sunday for dinner now. Not out of obligation, not for money, but out of love. Real love, the kind that isn't perfect but tries anyway. Melissa had found her calling. She'd started teaching art classes for underprivileged kids at the same community center where I'd once attended therapy sessions. "You started it, Fiona," she'd told me one afternoon, her voice thick with emotion. "You showed me how healing feels when it's shared." I had smiled, not because I needed credit, but because I knew Patrick would have been proud. Jared, too, was finding his way. After leaving rehab, he began volunteering at Hopeview, mentoring others who were fighting the same demons he once faced. He even spoke at local schools about addiction and recovery. "If I can keep one kid from ending up where I did," he told me, "then maybe all of this was worth it." For once, I believed him completely. The inheritance had long since been released to both of them. And to my surprise, neither squandered it. Melissa invested her share into expanding the art program. Jared used his to help fund a halfway house for recovering addicts. The money that once symbolized greed had become something else entirely: redemption. I spent most of my days painting again. Not the dark, angry strokes of grief, but scenes full of light, fields, oceans, quiet moments. Each canvas felt like another breath of freedom. My limp had worsened over the years, but I didn't mind. The cane, now polished and engraved, had become a part of me, not a reminder of weakness, but of endurance. I carried it proudly, as if it were a trophy from a war I'd finally won. One afternoon, Melissa came by with an idea. "We should open a gallery," she said, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "Not just for your art, for stories like ours. Art that speaks about pain, healing, forgiveness." I laughed. "A gallery? That sounds like a lot of work." "That's why we'll do it together," she insisted. "You, me, and Jared." At first, I thought she was joking. But a few months later, there we were standing inside a small renovated space downtown, surrounded by fresh paint, soft lighting, and the quiet buzz of something new being born. We called it Second Light. The name came from something Patrick used to say. Even after the darkest night, there's always a second light, not as bright, but more beautiful, because it's earned. Opening day was small but perfect. The walls were lined with my work and Melissa's students' pieces art that told stories of loss and recovery. Jared gave a short speech that left the room silent. "My stepmom once taught me that love isn't soft," he said. "Sometimes it's the hardest lesson of all, the kind that breaks you so you can rebuild stronger." I couldn't stop the tears that filled my eyes. As people wandered through the gallery, I noticed one painting that drew the most attention, the landscape that had once hidden the inheritance. It hung in the center of the room, framed with care, the faint seam from Melissa's brush still visible if you looked closely. A woman asked me what it meant. I smiled and said, "It's about finding value in what you can't see." She nodded thoughtfully and moved on, but I stood there for a moment longer, remembering every moment that had led to this: the betrayal, the humiliation, the silence, the slow, painful climb back to forgiveness. I realized something then. Justice hadn't been about revenge at all. It had been about rebuilding what was broken, piece by piece, heart by heart. Later that evening, after everyone had left, the three of us stood together in the gallery. Melissa was locking up while Jared wiped down the counter. The sunset poured golden light through the windows, casting long shadows across the walls. "You did it, Fiona," Melissa said quietly. "No," I corrected, smiling at both of them. "We did it," Jared laughed softly. "I never thought we'd all end up here like this." "Neither did I admitted. "But life has a funny way of circling back when you least expect it." He looked at the painting one last time and said, "Dad would have loved this place." I nodded. "He's here, Jared. Every brushstroke, every lesson, every laugh, he's here." When we finally stepped outside, the sky was streaked with pink and orange. The air was cool, crisp, full of promise. I leaned on my cane, feeling the weight of it not as a burden, but as balance. Melissa looped her arm through mine. Jared carried the last box of supplies to the car. For once, everything felt aligned. Not perfect, not painless, but whole. That night, back home, I sat by the window with a cup of tea. The cane rested beside me, its engraved handle glinting softly in the lamplight. I opened my journal for the last time and wrote, "They hid my cane as a joke. I hid their inheritance to teach them." But in the end, none of it was about revenge. It was about remembering who we were and becoming who we could be. I closed the book, smiled to myself, and whispered into the quiet, "Thank you, Patrick, for giving me a family even when it took me years to teach them what that word means." Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, carrying echoes of laughter from somewhere distant. For the first time in a long time, it didn't sound lonely. It sounded alive. And if I've learned anything, it's that the best revenge is becoming the person they never believed you could be.